I'm Jamie Henderson from Denver, Colorado. I've always felt that Stanford Law students and alums had skills and credentials that allowed them to greatly further the LGBTQ rights movement. And since my coming out in 1978, I've been involved in many LGBT organizations. I graduated in the class of 1983, and I was an early leader of what was then the Gay Law Students Association. That was a very different time. In fact, in my second year, I was the Gay Law Students Association. When I learned that this affinity group was starting, I volunteered to prepare a history of the organization, partly because I knew some of the early organizers and wanted to document that. I was assisted by Carol Wilson, who's a member of our community and who was a special collections librarian at Stanford Law. It turned out that during the pandemic, Carol independently had prepared an 8-page chronology of LGBTQ student activism at Stanford Law using Stanford newspapers. And I got access to that. Carol also gave me access to 45 years of graduation programs. And the graduation programs listed the names of the leaders of Outlaw. So that helped me get started. This then snowballed into a major oral history project. So far, I recorded and transcribed Zoom interviews of 20 alums, amounting to about 12 hours of videos. And it's given me a new appreciation for the job of court reporters when you have to transcribe all these things. I hope you'll look at the links that were sent out with the last email you got for this presentation. You can see pictures of all the alums who've been interviewed so far, and also a separate page that lists some of the activism of some of those alums. There are many topics I hope to share in the future with this alumni group, but from the interviews I completed with the assistance of Stanford's videography department, I put together a 7-minute video with just a tiny sampling of the history that I've documented and discovered. And so we're going to share it now. One question I asked all the alums was the number of LGBT students in their class and in the law school and its makeup. The numbers gradually increased over time, but the makeup varied.
Yeah, so there wasn't anything on campus that I knew, but there was the locker room, which I knew about before I came because it's a gay bar, and it was in what's called Whiskey Gulch. And the locker room, it was mostly local people, but a handful of people from Stanford went there. You know, more than a handful, but not very many. But you know, and that's where I met the other gay man in my class.
There were several, and there was what I would call a critical mass, so I didn't feel alone. There were only a half dozen or thereabouts of us in my class.
And I'm so happy I meet Jamie. And then I learn Jamie is the only out student in the whole law school.
Well, in my class and the class following me.
He did a really good job with my class. He recruited me and about 10 gay men, some of whom were out during law school, some of whom may still not be out for all I know, but he did an outstanding job in increasing our numbers.
There was a significant group of open lesbians at the law school, but when I first started in my first 2 years at the law school, there were no openly gay men, as I recall. There were definitely no openly gay men my first year, because that's how it is that I became co-chair of the student association so quickly. That some students who were there but closeted, you know, gradually came out. And so by the time I left, there were definitely out gay men, but not in my first couple of years.
My guess is that there were 20 people at that first LGB law student group meeting that I went to in the fall of 1990. Although there might have been a few partners of people or boyfriends or girlfriends of people in the group. I think my class probably had 8 people, maybe 4 or 5 gay men and 3 lesbians, and maybe there were 15 total at the school. I know there was only 1 lesbian in Julia Friedlander's class because she was really pissed off about it and let everyone know, which I think did lead the faculty to admit more queer people. And there was a class, I think of 95 after me that was had like 30 queer people or more.
I mean, my best guess is you're probably about 10 to 15 for each class. So I would guess about 10 to 15 for my class. And same thing with the people ahead of me and behind. And actually, I would say there might be more, both in the class of 2000 and the class of 2002. I'm probably underestimating it.
I also asked LGBT alums about what issues and experiences they had while in law school. The following is a brief sampling.
In 1978, Michael Myers protested to the administration when he had an externship offer with the State Department revoked because he was openly gay.
So the dean at the time was a man named Charlie Myers. The legal advisor at the State Department was a man named Warren Christopher, who was a Stanford grad and very involved. As it played through, basically the law school in suspending the externship program with the State Department over, the treatment of me being denied it for being gay.
In 1985, during the Kirkwood Moot Court competition, Amelia Craig Kramer was required to argue the opposing side that sodomy laws were constitutional.
There was a point at which we had to argue off brief, meaning against our own position. And what I did arguing off brief was I just pounded the table and said traditional family values over and over again. I made no logical argument whatsoever, as I had done, no constitutionally valid argument, as I had done on the case to try to overturn the sodomy laws. And the judges, the court judges, gave me a lot of positive feedback about that argument that I completely disagreed with and that was not logical whatsoever. At which point I came out of the closet to those judges following the argument, and their jaws just dropped open when I told them I was a lesbian and that all I had done was pound the table and say traditional family values, and that I had not made any logical arguments. So it was surprising to me that they thought my argument was so good. So I felt like I made somewhat of an impact on them by that disclosure at the conclusion of the argument.
In fall 1991, Governor Pete Wilson had vetoed a sexual orientation non-discrimination bill. Law students joined protests of his appearance at Stanford's 100th anniversary.
And so the queer law students and some of the other, like the queer business students and the other, queer student groups, we all got tickets to go to this event. And then we all went in and somebody collected all the tickets, went out and handed all those tickets out to like ACT UP and Queer Nation people who had come down to demonstrate. And when Pete Wilson came on, people tried to drown him out. And it was a very loud, raucous demonstration, and really didn't let him speak. But that was kind of an exciting demonstration.
In the summer of 2000, before his second year at Stanford Law, Dylan Vade's life was transformed.
I met a female to male person. The moment I met that person, I was like, oh my gosh, this is me. And so there was a real joy in my life for finally being like, oh my gosh, I have figured out this giant piece and it's falling into place. So I was very, very joyful that summer. And I entered that first day of the second year, very joyful. And also handing out these one-pagers of things I'd like you to read before you ask me questions or make comments about me being trans.
After graduation in 2002, Dylan went on to co-found the Transgender Law Center.
I hope this may inspire more alums to participate and contribute to the Oral History Project. Thank you, everyone. You see the note. If you have questions, please post them in the chat. We'll try and address them live or otherwise. I wanted to give just a couple observations about some of the discoveries from the history project. One is that law students are only at the school for 3 years, and even activists often know little about what came before or what happened later, not only regarding Outlaw and the student groups and changes that they got the law school to make, but also the opportunities that Stanford Law offered Outlaw students. And my project hopes to bridge that gap. I'm hoping to continue the oral history project with more interviews. I'd like to get more broader interviews with alums from later classes since the mid-1990s, and more alums who are not cis white gay males. That's a pitch I want to make. There are other topics I would like to explore further. One is the effect of having openly LGBT professors. One is partnerships with other affinity groups. And also interviewing alums who didn't necessarily have an entirely positive experience. I know from the history that Carol Wilson provided that there has been harassment, but when people get interviewed, they don't seem to remember it. So maybe that's a good thing. But I do want to document that. And finally, an observation that you might find interesting is that some of the alums who did considerable activism in their student days did not necessarily do a lot later in their career, while other alums who may not even have been out when they were in law school have subsequently been involved in major activism. And I have and would like to continue to interview both groups. So with that, we'll turn to our panel. We have a panel of 3 alums and 1 current student. As I said, please feel free to post questions and answers that we'll try to address at the conclusion. The first panelist is Sims Brandon from Portland, Oregon. Sims is a graduate of the law school class of 1980, and in the fall of 1978, he was co-founder of what was then the Gay Law Students Association. So I'd like him to tell, I'm asking all the panelists to respond to this question. Discuss what LGBTQ life was like at Stanford Law and Stanford during your time, a bit about your involvement in Outlaw or its predecessors, and issues that may have come up. So Sims, it's your turn.
Okay. Well, I think what was interesting when, and I think John McNamara is in the personal room there. So I'd acknowledge him as the other co-founder. I think what was when we arrived in 1977, there certainly was no gay anything in any of the graduate schools at Stanford. There was the undergraduate Gay People's Union, and we actually were able to use that as a way to actually met law students there. I think I actually met John there initially, and but we also, because we were law students, we could also like go to the bars as I think one of the people in the video, Paul, said, it talks about, we actually lived 1 year near the locker room and could walk over. So it was a matter of the first matter was just finding each other. And I think we were fortunate. John and I were in, as we were talking just the other day, he had a writing instructor who was very supportive, Doris Cordell, who went on to be a dean and a judge and all kinds of things. And I developed, in my small section, I developed a good relationship with Dean Myers, who was mentioned earlier in the video. And so in the fall of '78, when John and I said we need to start the Gay Law Students Association, we had Doris and Dean Myers, and it worked pretty well. They were very supportive, and we were able to found the organization and start bringing speakers to campus, and we started doing, creating our own writing assignments in class, doing research on things that were gay related. So it was an interesting time. In some ways, I would realize that 90% of the people didn't know what the hell we were, who we were, what we were doing, and didn't care. And then, but it did, we had to start somewhere. So I think we started sort of modestly, and as I've explained to Jamie, I think at that time the rules at the law school were that you had to have 5 people sign an application to form a student organization, and so the 5 people was John and me and a woman named Rachel Bagby, and I'm actually embarrassed that I can't really remember the exact other 2 names, but they were 2 straight white women who also signed. Rachel is a Black woman.
Why could you not get 5 LGBT people?
Part of it was identifying 5 LGBT people, and part of it was people were still at that time very, very afraid. This was still, do you remember in 1978, probably there were 30 states where if you were openly gay, you couldn't be admitted to the bar. So people were like, I don't really want to put my name on that. They were being very conservative and avoiding risk. And I was very interested when you, in that Jamie set out some more questions for the conversation today. And one of the questions was about what was the impact of when Harvey Milk was assassinated. And I knew Harvey, and I knew Harvey also knew that he knew he was at risk. He knew that when he got elected, he would be a target. And we come from the 60s and 70s with lots of political assassinations and political violence. And we had to realize that the more visible we became, the more vulnerable we were. And on the one hand, we wanted to have a great social life. On the other hand, we realized we had to do these other things and become visible, even though it made us vulnerable. And so we did.
Can you recount the questions that you were asked by Dean Myers?
It's very funny. The way I developed my relationship with Dean Myers was, he was, as I said, he was my professor of the real property small section. And he and I were both cigarette smokers back then. And fortunately, I quit. He didn't, but he and I would always hang out before class and have a cigarette. And so we just started talking, and we developed a relationship. We talked about sports and politics and everything, architecture, anything. And then when we went to form the Case Law Students Association, he actually said to me, like, "Are you sure?" And I was like, "Am I sure? Yes, I'm sure I want to form this organization." And he said, "No, are you sure you're gay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm sure I'm gay." And he was like, "Okay, fine, it's approved."
Well, very good. And we'll come back to you, Sims. And for the people who are live, you've got another organizer there, and please talk to him later about his observations. So next we're going to jump to Susan Misner. And Susan is from San Francisco. She's a member of the class of 1991, graduated in 1992. So I think that's why you're listed as 92. And is currently the director of the ACLU Disability Rights Project. So Susan, your responses to the same question.
Thanks. So I did a little slideshow to share with you that was, I hope that we can use as the and I'm not sure if it's working. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And the setting for folks who weren't there was that even though we were a decade later than Sims, it was still the bad old days. AIDS had been around for a decade, no cure in sight. Everyone was very in the closet if they were HIV positive. Gays were banned in the military. There was no legal recognition of our relationships. And Bowers v. Hardwick was the law of the land. And for the folks who are in the room at Stanford, I would really love to see how many of you have read Bowers v. Hardwick. Yes. Okay. One of our crew actually invited Michael Hardwick to come speak to us. And then we took him out for a grand time in San Francisco. It was great. But what wasn't great was that it was still the law of the land. Here's a few headlines from that time. There's the military, international discrimination, repression of speech. It's just a bad time. But I like to say the cartoonists were on our side. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Tolles, but he was fabulous. This was basically his take on Bowers v. Hardwick. You know, 2 men in bed, alone at last. 2 men in bed is a crime, you're under arrest. Looks like 3 men to me. Well, 4 actually, and then not counting the state legislature. And way down at the bottom, the guys in the back say, hey, we can't see. So we put cartoons like this on our recruitment posters for the what was then called GALSA, the Gay and Lesbian Law Students Association. But I was one of 3 lesbians in my class and the class behind me. Julia Friedlander was the single one in the class behind me. And I was bisexual. This was and I just was recruited to be the co-chair. We were very binary back then. We always had 1 male and 1 female co-chair when we could. And I insisted that the name be changed to the Bisexual Gay, Lesbian, and Law Students Association. Huge uproar. You know, lots of men only saying, you know, there is no such thing as being bisexual. You just haven't realized you're gay yet. And our current dean, your current dean, was our current dean, Paul Brest, who was a great ally, who bought a table at the Bay Area Lawyers for Individual Freedom dinners every year, where we would hear LaDoris Cordell speak and sing. She's very talented. And we had support with the administration in the law school. The big activities that we had on campus was the biggest issue that we really dealt with was domestic partner benefits. And I had a partner, Rachel Bernstein then, Ray Bernstein later, who he transitioned to being male, who was, like me, very poor. And I had a disability as well. I needed to live on campus. I was very clear that we were in a committed relationship, and there was no route for me to get housing on campus. Someone who was an insider said, you can write an appeal. And so I wrote this letter saying, were it not for an overarching system of oppression, we would most likely be married. And so we should be in married student housing. And that's how we became the poster children for domestic partner benefits. We worked with my co-chair for BGALSA, Ed Swanson, Julia Friedlander, Tom Nolan, Tom Henning, a bunch of fabulous, fabulous people. And it took us a lot of work to get domestic partnerships available for everyone. Along the way, there was plenty of opposition, a lot of offensive things that we saw in the paper and that we found in our housing. That's Ray's beautiful writing and beautiful rage in response to some of the things that happened in our housing. But we also got support, and there was a lot of understanding that domestic partner benefits were fair. And we got a victory within a year. Within 1 year, we had met with all of the different players, including President Kennedy, who took this to the Board of Trustees. And we thought we'd probably have to go to both houses of Congress eventually. It was taking so long, but it was only a year, and we got the broadest, most comprehensive domestic partner benefits for students in the country at the time. It included access to not only all of the features on campus, the library, the gym, et cetera, but also health benefits and housing. And one of the things that the Stanford Daily did was do a follow-up a year later and interviewed folks about what this had meant for everyone. And it was really, as the title says, liberating. I think people felt recognized and seen for the first time in a really long time. I think I'll stop sharing now. And we did a lot of other things as well. I think we, I can talk about work that we did with a coalition for a diversified faculty to get Janet Halley, the first tenured out queer professor. We worked on recruiting more people. We worked on quality of life in law firms, et cetera. It was a very active, very invigorating time.
Well, thanks, Susan. And just a couple additional comments about some of the stuff that the History Project has documented. You talked about living through AIDS. Some of the participants participated to commemorate some of our early leaders who died of AIDS. And the gay alums who I met, there was a meeting in fall of 1981, and Sims was there, and within about 7 years, 3 of the men who were there died, including 2 very prominent openly gay alums. The other thing is the name change. So the change to Bagalsa lasted about 3 years, and then there was an enormous debate in about 1994 when they had a much bigger group over Outlaw, and it was a debate between Outlaw, the current students will appreciate this. It was not a debate about remaining Bagalsa. It was Outlaw or Outlaw common Stanford Law queers. So that has been that was an issue many years ago. Anyway, let me move on. Is Nick on his laptop?
I am not yet. Apologies.
Okay. Should we jump to Emma?
Sure.
Nick is a graduate of 2019, so we're skipping a large distance anyway. But we'll skip to Emma, who's second year at the law school and is current co-president of Outlaw, who is in the student lounge there, correct?
Yes, with a handful of other students. Also many former Outlaw board members and some current ones. So anything I can't answer, maybe they can pick I'm deputizing them and they don't want to be, but any other questions can be answered by folks here as well.
Well, tell us a little bit about what's going on now. Among other things, How big is the organization?
So we are about 110 members across all 3 years. At our faculty dinner in the fall, which is usually our like highest attended event, we had about 90 to 100 RSVPs from students, faculty members, and staff. We have about 10 faculty members right now who are openly queer. I think both of our major 14th Amendment professors, Rubia Belt, who teaches disability law, George Fisher and evidence, and a couple others. Well, yes, our new First Amendment professor, Evelyn Dewick.
I don't know how to say her name.
But I think our community feels very strong and well represented in recent years.
Also Juliet Brody and Holly.
Yes, Juliet Brody, who is one of the clinic faculty, and Holly,
Parrish.
there we go, Holly Parrish, who is in student affairs, yeah. And I was also lucky enough last year to take not only a 14th Amendment course that covered all the bad cases like Bowers, as well as the more recent good ones, but also a course specifically on gender and sexuality law, in which we covered all of that stuff, as well as newer work that was taught by an adjunct, Alana Turner, who was working at TLC Transgender Law Center for a long time. One of the clinics here, the International Human Rights and Conflict Resolution Clinic, also has a current project going on, working with lawyers opposing Uganda's recent Anti-Homosexuality Act. And so LGBTQ advocacy is alive and present right now. We obviously dealt last year with the boy, I hesitate to even bring it up because it still feels, yes, the incident where Judge Duncan from the, oh no, which circuit? Fifth Circuit, was invited by FedSoc to speak on campus, and Outlaw, along with several other organizations on campus, protested his talk, given some of his really horrific decisions that are anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ, and in a very vicious way. And after that event, our community both came together stronger and also felt very endangered. We received a lot of support from the other affinity groups on campus. Many of them wrote letters in support that were both shared with us and posted publicly. But I think we were all really disheartened and disappointed by the administration's response, which was, I think, you could call it peacekeeping in a way. They very much landed on the side of free speech and trying to appease a judge who had a bad time on our campus. But I think in the last year, they've tried to do the work to rebuild some of those, that trust with their student organizations. And I think we are eager to continue LGBTQ advocacy here on campus.
Let me ask you a couple questions. First of all, for the older alums who may know nothing about it, describe what the clinics are, how they operate, and tell us a little bit more about the Uganda issue and how this clinic is helping.
Yeah, so I'm afraid I wasn't actually able to get in touch with someone who was in the clinic last quarter to get really specific details on the project they've been working on. But the clinics are full-time experiential learning. So since we've moved to the quarter system, it is pretty usual for students to spend one of their full quarters working full-time at a clinic. I think there are about 12 or 13 clinics that range in topics from, I know several of our members are in the community law clinic, which is run by Juliet Brody, again, one of the LGBTQ faculty members, which does work on housing access and other kinds of community law issues. Yeah, okay. And there's also the very famous Supreme Court litigation clinic. There's an immigration law clinic. They cover a whole range of issues. The International Human Rights Clinic runs several different small projects that they have teams of 2 to 3 students working on in the spring and fall quarters. Usually working with sort of local organizations on the ground to advocate for human rights issues and to fight against human rights violations. So in this case, the recent Anti-Homosexuality Act in Uganda was passed, I think, back in May of this year. Or sorry, it's not May yet. Back in May of 2023. And it not only criminalizes homosexuality, but also punishes certain types of aggravated homosexuality with the death penalty. And so there's been a lot of international advocacy as well as work being done by the students here to get that overturned.
Talk a little bit about, are there many social opportunities?
Yes. So with 110 members, that means there are ample opportunities for us to come together. I think we have big group meetings like 1 to 2 times a quarter with lots of smaller social gatherings happening very frequently. I think it's a very active community, and we're also excited to be hosting this spring our first what the affinity groups call signature events. So we're holding our first Lavender Ball, which is firm funded, but it's for us. Ladoris Cordell is actually going to be speaking at it. And Pedro can attest that we are hoping to have some tickets available to alums too. Yes. Oh, it's actually on the 12th. Sorry. It's Friday, April 12th. So that will be another great opportunity for our community to sort of come together and celebrate how far we've come.
Very good. And let me pass on another aspect of the history project. One of the last questions I asked each alum was what advice they would give to the current students. And we may be able to sort of slice that off for whatever use it has. So you should know, I can give you just the general summation. Some of them say, it's such a different world, I wouldn't possibly want to give them advice. But others of them, I guess the one thing that they pretty much say is be out. Even people who are not necessarily out for all of their career would advise that. So anyway, Nick, are you available? Maybe?
Anticipated.
We've got you without video, but feel free to answer the same questions.
Yeah, happy to.
And let me introduce you. Nick is a member of the class of 2019 and is a deputy county council for Santa Clara County, correct?
Correct.
Okay, your turn.
Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm Nick DiFiesta, he, him. I started at Stanford in 2016 at the law school, and it was definitely a big change from some of the earlier. I guess I kind of had like one of the bridge experiences in between some of the earlier alums we've heard from and what we just heard from Emma. So when I joined Outlaw, I audibly gasped when I heard 90 to 100 RSVPs for the welcome dinner. Because I think we were still pretty big. I think there's maybe, depending on how you counted us, like anywhere from 40 to 60 Outlaw folks each year at the law school across all the years. And there's another maybe dozen or two like Outlaw affiliates, like folks who didn't really associate with the organization, but who were LGBTQ plus in some way. But it sounds like even just since my time at SLS from 2016 to 2019, that has only grown even more, which is really exciting to hear. So the year, I'd say one of the things that marked the time when I was at Stanford was how Outlaw's approach and thinking and even composition became a lot more diverse among both issues of gender and race. The year before I started, I know Outlaw's big advocacy push was for all gender and gender inclusive bathrooms in the law school. And that's not something that I know it took a lot of effort for the cohorts before me to achieve that. And then in my time at the law school, we saw from my first year, there was not a single openly trans student that I was familiar with at the law school. And by the end, there were a few, and I know that that number I think has only increased, which again is a really exciting news. But I'd say the biggest shift for me was with the advent of, or like many of you might have heard of the group Racism Lives Here Too. It was this advocacy group that formed in 2018 during my 2L year. There's a group of 5 women of color 1Ls who took it upon themselves to challenge the way that the law school treated race and issues of intersectionality in both the legal curriculum and in kind of the day-to-day functioning of the law school itself. And they started a movement that brought many people in, many students of color, a bunch of allies, and to really work to advocate for major shifts to how the law school thought and treated race, and culminating in a big presentation to the entire law school. There was a working group put together by former Dean Liz McGill, who you may have seen in the news lately. And I'd say the big shift was in getting folks to think about race in these ways. And Outlaw was a very active ally of that movement, and was very involved in making sure all of that happened. So and I think we saw an increasingly diverse Outlaw student group, and it's sort of increasing awareness of how issues of race affected the Outlaw community itself, and how, as I mentioned several times here, a lot of Outlaw leadership and Outlaw members tended to be of these cis white men variety. And so I think that it feels like that has shifted. So anyway, I don't know if my rambling was a helpful illumination, but yeah, happy to answer more questions.
Let me ask a general question, both to Nick and Emma. And maybe this is just my impression based on when I was there. Certainly the LGBT student group is much bigger and more organized, but I also think the conservative students are too. I don't remember, we didn't have a Federalist Society when I was there, and some of the other people who've talked said that they had okay relationships with conservative students, but I at least have the impression that in the same way that Outlaw has grown, so have the conservative students. Is that accurate or not?
Yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate, and it seems like it sort of happened almost in parallel to Outlaw's growth. I mean, I know obviously there are plenty of theses and books written on this topic, the rise of the Federalist Society, and sort of how is this like outside funded movement that has now taken over the judiciary. But and just for, I think when I started, FedSoc was there, but it was still, so I started, right, the first few months of my time in law school were still pre-Trump. And so the Federalist Society was still kind of more of an intellectual exercise than anything else. I don't think it took on as much of a political component as it seems to have now. But then I remember over the 3 years I was at Stanford, I saw it turn sort of from that intellectual sort of club to something that seemed far more interested in owning the libs than anything else. And I'd say the most notable sort of the confluence of Outlaw and FedSoc for me was one of my good friends from law school, Chuck Roberts, is a very rare breed, a gay Republican, and he was trying to sort of have it both ways and be both an outlaw and a FedSoc. And he was one of two candidates who ran for the FedSoc presidency. And FedSoc, there's a sort of reactionary, sort of more Trump-oriented bloc within FedSoc that managed to go behind his back and change the FedSoc bylaws to make it so that there was only one president, so that they wouldn't have a gay co-president. It previously had been two, and there'd only been two candidates running. And so I think that sort of represented, like, I think FedSoc had a choice that year to sort of maybe move towards something more moderate or embrace these more reactionary, homophobic stance, and they went with the homophobia. So yeah, I think FedSoc has only gotten more and more aggressive from there, and it's fascinating and terrifying to see.
Emma, your observations?
Yeah, people in the room were reacting very strongly to that because actually one of the people who was, I think one of two presidents.
Nope,
Nope,
one. It's
just
still
okay.
just one.
It's still just one, apparently. The one president of FedSoc last year who both was one of the leaders in inviting Judge Duncan and then went on Tucker Carlson to talk about the protest after the fact was actually a gay man. I don't think he took it in a more moderate direction. But I can't say that besides that sort of particular event, most of FedSoc's political activities have not tended towards homophobia. Like they might invite judges who hold those views to talk about other topics, allegedly, but there aren't large events being held specifically on anti-LGBTQ issues. I'm seeing a question that is, how big is FedSoc at SLS now? I actually have no idea.
Every class year this year, hi, I'm Erin, I'm a 3L. It's been increasing every year. Like I'm a 3L and I think there's only a single digit number of active FedSoc people in my class because several reasons. I think there were fewer that were admitted. I think that there was a lot more social shame involved. And every year since, I think, including the 1Ls, there's been a 2-digit number. And I think I agree with Emma's assessment of the climate and also just what they do. And there are more gay Republicans, which are, yeah, so interesting. George Santos vibes.
Can you talk, I forget the program, but what is the program that Paul Brest started to sort of bridge the gap between conservatives and liberals? Anyone know?
Doesn't sound like anyone knows what that is.
The alums all about it.
Sorry.
There might be such a thing. I don't know how much people on either extreme of the political spectrum engage. I think I know what you're talking. Can't come up with the name of it off the top of my head. Okay. But I have a feeling that that's more heavily involved with people who are already sort of in the middle. So
I'll do a brief summary of some history going back that I discovered from the work that Carol Wilson did. So one of the alums of the law school was Peter Thiel.
Yep.
And there was a 1L who was not arrested by Stanford police, but he and two undergraduates were yelling homophobic and anti-AIDS slurs outside the dorm, whose headmaster or whatever was a professor, openly gay professor. And it created a huge commotion at the law school. And over whether he said this is all free speech. And it was a huge debate within the law school. You guys might find it interesting that I Googled his name because it was an unusual name. He left Stanford, went to Harvard Law School, where he graduated, and became a big high-tech executive until he was removed from the board of the high-tech company for a consensual relationship with a male employee. So I'm trying to document that. Yes, the ePluribus project. Does that ring any bells?
That's what I was thinking of, and I do think that it's mostly attracted people who are already sort of in the middle of the political spectrum, as opposed to either extreme.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's, Nick, you're now on video. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the things that the alumni group might do? We need you unmuted.
There we go. Sorry, it wouldn't let me unmute myself. So yeah, in addition to being on this panel and finally making a visual appearance, apologies, I am one of the co-presidents of the SLS LGBTQ+ alumni group. We have been slowly building up steam over the past few years to try to, get involved in some of the discussions we've talked about here, to uncover a lot of the history of Outlaw and its former named counterparts, to help provide resources and mentorship to current Outlaw students, to come together as a community and perhaps advocate on efforts we would like to advocate on. And so that is an ongoing project. I think the easiest way to get involved is we have a group on LinkedIn that you can join to get more updates. You can also contact Pedro to get added to whatever list or looped in, whatever makes sense. And is there anything I'm missing, Pedro, for ways to join the org?
Well, I just want to also highlight Alan Drexel, is based in New York. So this group is really, we're trying to bring in more alumni perspectives. It's alumni driven. So the more voices we have, the more great ideas we have, the more help we have, that lets our team help support and build more of these types of community building events, bridging cross generations across the country. And then we've been building a much stronger partnership with Outlaw to make sure that we help connect them to alumni in a way that I know over the past few years, I've heard from a lot of the student organizations that one of the biggest challenges is getting in contact with alumni, knowing who they are, knowing who's willing to offer help for when they need certain things or come offer their expertise as speakers. One of the things that we are working on with one of the other Outlaw board members is exploring a community connections type of project that leans more to the kind of mentor-mentee space. So we'll definitely, as that evolves, we'll be reaching out to you all. If you received our email, then you're likely to receive that. But definitely encourage you all to spread the word to other classmates and friends that are part of the community or want to help, since that is one of our limitations. Is we don't have a comprehensive outreach list to all of the SLS LGBTQ+ alumni. I'll throw in the link include the link for the LinkedIn group in a bit. We'll include that in our email, but also reaching out to me or the Office of Alumni Relations, making sure you even if you don't have a LinkedIn page, we want to make sure that we're reaching you and sending you event invitations or news updates, and are able to make sure you're in the loop with everything that we're starting to ramp up in 2024.
Emma, do you want to talk a little bit about what the current Outlaw students might want from alums?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, we are eager to just hear all of your perspectives and the, I think, really crucial history of this group. I think this was a great start on that, but I also think the students are eager for some of that one-on-one connection as well, particularly for students who are interested in pursuing careers in LGBTQ advocacy, connecting with people from Stanford who have continued into that work and in sort of related civil rights fields, I think would be of huge value. Or even just understanding how to navigate, although of course it will have been different across the years, but understanding how you have navigated being queer in a profession that is very small c conservative. And I just think we're really eager for the just advice and mentorship and wisdom of those who did so much important work before us.
And I would like, I mean, one of the links that you got was a list of activism of people who I interviewed. I don't think I have to interview people to add people to the list. I see John Lewis is on. I know John was a major marriage equality activist, still is, I believe. And through, I think the LGBT alums know their classmates, and they know who have done things. One of the people who was on earlier is a judge in Seattle who was a class ahead of me. He was married and had kids and came out 20 years later, but he was one of the main litigators in Arlene Flowers, which was one of the gay marriage benefits case, and then became a judge. And Bill Weinberger, who also had to leave, is a judge down in LA, and he was on numerous boards of LGBT organizations. And that's one pitch that I want to try and make and encourage the alums to talk about the variety of ways that they can further the community, not just necessarily from working for an LGBT rights organization, but within their careers. Because I have done many things in organizations using my legal skills, but not per se LGBT rights. So yeah, a judge panel for the future. Another question for the alums, which is, given all the opportunities, such as the International Human Rights, I am hoping that we'll have some virtual presentations where we can hear from the students and some of their advisors, professors. Because for those of us old timers, we didn't have that when we were there. We were doing it on our own. Sims, do you want to talk about, in the early years, access to Lexis was a huge deal, right?
Oh, it was a huge deal. I told you about that. John and I co-researched and co-wrote a paper in 1979 when Lexis was a brand new machine. And there was a woman named Donna Hitchens who ran the Lesbian Rights Project in San Francisco. And she asked us if we could do research on child custody involving gay parents. And we said, sure. We had at that time unlimited access to this brand new free machine because they were, trying to get everybody addicted to it. And so that we would use it in the future. And so we did. And we went to Lawrence Friedman at the law school, Professor Friedman, and said, we want to write a paper on child custody cases involving gay parents. And it had never been done before. So we had to start somewhere. That's where we started. But and the key was that Donna asked us that we had access to this research tool that nobody else did. I mean,
and to give you an idea, another Alan Heppel, who was a year behind Sims, when they were first years, Paul Brest let the class sort of run itself and say, you can make a small group and study something. So a number of gay and lesbian students contacted Matt Coles, I think, in San Francisco.
Sure, yes.
And said, what should we research? You'll love this story. They researched intermediate scrutiny under equal protection.
Yes.
Because that's where we thought we were going to make progress then. Anyway, let's move now to any questions.
And I've read the paper, by the way.
Oh, okay. We're going to unmute people if people have questions. Feel free to ask them. Contributions, put them in the chat. Everyone's
able to unmute yourselves now, or you could raise your hand. Jamie could call on you if you have any questions.
Okay.
Paul, do you want to take? Paul was the earliest LGBT grad I found. and he graduated in 1971. Do you want to say a little bit about your experience?
Well, that was, but the fact that I'm the earliest about has to do with being 1971, because Stonewall was in 69. And at that time, instead of the clinics, we had externships. So I happened to spend 6 months of the first semester of my third year in Washington, D.C. And at that time, the Gay Liberation Front was just thriving there. And so I got very involved in that and got very radicalized and did all sorts of out activities. And I came back for the last semester of my third year, and there really wasn't anything. There's a group in Palo Alto. It was kind of starting. It was Gay Liberation, but it was mostly not law school. But I was out because I was arrested for distributing pamphlets in the shopping in Christmas time in downtown in Washington. And so everyone at the externship knew about me being gay, including the other students. So it was known in the school. So in that sense, I was out, but there wasn't any activity at the school exactly that I did, as an out person.
Who was your faculty advisor there?
I don't know if I had an advisor.
At the externship, wasn't it Michael Wald?
Oh, yeah, Mike Wald. Well, he wasn't an advisor.
Oh.
He actually was there for 6 months as doing research on his own or something like that. Yeah. And he also lived near me. I got to know him. He lived near me in San Francisco. But that was now I would be throwing myself into campus activities at that point because I was looking to do that, but there wasn't any structure for me. But probably a year or so there was, I'm sure, and see how it. So it's sort of like quite a different environment,
I feel like calling on other people. Carol, do you want to say a little bit about the research you did? She's on.
Jamie, there's a question from.
Oh,
I'd like to say something if I may.
Shoot.
I'm John McNamara. I am from the class of 1980, and Sims, I'm the John that Sims has been referring to and so generously and many of the things he said. I'm really impressed with a lot of the things I've heard and things I wasn't really expecting to hear about today. But I want to talk a little bit personally. I have lived since I graduated from Stanford less than an hour away in San Francisco for most of the time, and now in the East Bay. And this is the first time that I've set foot back in the law school since I graduated. I have had, of course, I get all the emails from the Stanford Alumni Associations. There's been nothing that's made me want to come back here until I got this invitation tonight. So I want to thank you all for including me. And I am really moved to be here and to learn from everybody. I want to say that my own involvement with LGBT movement since I graduated has been deep but limited in scope. I haven't been involved in politics or advocacy, but I have done a lot of work for people in need. When I graduated in 1980, before AIDS had a name, it's called GRID, gay-related immune disorder. At one point, it went through several different names, and but it landed as ARC, and then AIDS and ARC, and all these different things. But the AIDS Legal Referral Panel was begun by a Stanford law student alum who was a good friend of Sims and ours. His name was Gary Wood. Gary was 2 years ahead of us at Stanford, and certainly would have been excited about working with the association had it existed when he was here. My work had always, I just got involved really, really deeply with helping gay people, lesbian people, and with their problems with AIDS and discrimination beginning of pro bono work for me. It ended up turning into a career as I turned my work in trench warfare, writing wills for people who are going to die. And I became an estate planner, learned that I actually liked that kind of work when it wasn't so intense. It's kind of weird because when I was at Stanford, I think I skipped every single estate planning class that I had. It was like the most boring thing in the world to study. And it turned out to me to be a fascinating and deeply rewarding career. So I just want to thank everybody. What I really got, what touched me a lot is the idea of the continuity of this organization, and to really feel in a gathering like this of how important it is, something I never really thought about. I left Stanford behind. I didn't think much about it. I was one of those people who really did not have a great experience here. I didn't feel like it was a place I could breathe easily. I spent most of my time trying to get away from it. Sims was my dedicated driver for 3 years, running around to different places to escape. And it's really nice to see Sims again. And so it's nice to, the collateral benefit of an organization like this, apart from the advocacy for everything that you do outside of the people who are here. And it's really impressive to hear about the local work, state work, national and international work in Uganda and everything. It's amazing. But there's a collateral benefit for the people who are here that had it been at a place where it is now, had I been here, I would have been a much happier, well-grounded, and probably healthier person. You guys might not realize it. I am delighted that you can take it for granted. I hear this number that there's 110 people or so in the organization now. Jamie said that number to me when I was talking to him on the phone, and I just assumed he meant through the history of the organization. But that's all I have to say. Thank you. It's really, really wonderful to be here.
Good. Carol, do you want to tell a little bit about your research?
Yes. So my name is Carol Wilson. I use they, them. I was the special collection librarian for the Robert Crown Library. I started in late 2017, early 2018. And my time kind of coincide with Racism Lives Here. And one of the major critique from that student organization is there was no sense of history, which they were very right. There was a lot of history, but it wasn't really accessible. And this started basically a 2.5-year long project where, as I was processing historical records that were hidden in the basement of the library, I was trying to bring together in a single place kind of the history of LGBT activisms and student group, because that is a very interesting story going from this wasn't a very public aspect of the school, and then at the end of like the 50 years I was documenting, the law school was on the forefront of advocating for LGBT rights. And so I kind of dug through, as Jamie said, is like the SLS Law Journal newspaper. I was gathering the Stanford Daily. I was looking at formal press releases that the law school had put together detailing all these events and putting it in a centralized place. So when students did have questions about the past history, I wouldn't have the terrible answer of, I don't know. I could have like put, here's a primer, here's a timeline. There's a lot more research to be done.
Well, I appreciate it because you gave me the roadmap. So, well, I think people are dropping off. Pedro, do you want to follow up with me?
I was just going to say, the people, the other students in the room, I just see a friend, Chris Middleton, just made it too. If they want to say hi, share a little bit who they are. I think you're muted, Emma.
Sure, I am always happy to say hello. Like Pedro said, my name is Chris Middleton. I'm a undergrad alum of Stanford, class of 2016, and a law school alum, class of 2021. Sorry for joining late. I had a focus group I was facilitating. Funny enough, it was focused on LGBTQ youth and foster care. And then I drove down from Oakland. So I have been on the freeway so happy to be here and not on the road. Yeah, I was a member of Outlaw when I was a student at SLS. Hello, Nick. I recognize you. And, I think that being a queer student here was very easy because I think I joined a organization that was really robust and it felt like this part of my identity was really well represented. As someone who is now doing work with a lot of queer young people, primarily, people who are in their early teens, I would say that it's kind of alarming because I feel like their identity feels a lot more under threat. I don't have to tell you all that there have been a number of bills that have been passed that have been targeting queer young people, queer trans people especially. And so I feel incredibly honored that part of my work is supporting this community that is far too often under attack, and getting to utilize a lot of the sense of community and belonging that I had from my time at SLS and extending that out to other young people has been really, really wonderful. And yeah, so just on the spot, that's kind of who I am, a little bit about what the work I am doing now. And yeah, happy to join the space and always nice to see you, Pedro.
Yay. Can I say something actually?
We have one more person.
I'm
like
so
this.
sorry. I don't want to extend your time, but I'm in pre-day, came late. I'm a current student. I just want to say thank you guys for coming, because I think one thing about Stanford is that I felt is like you meet people and you're like, God, I can't believe they're gonna go into the law, and like I'm kind of worried a little bit about what we're doing out in the world after. And like I think meeting you guys and hearing about your work and your successes and your joys is really lovely too, that Stanford produces awesome people. And I think that's like a really good message to take away, especially like I think post Duncan and everything with that. And so I think also like I feel like I've made so many connections through Outlaw, and like I'm so grateful to also be making these like intergenerational connections too. And I really hope that like we get to continue talking and I don't know, just continue building this, because I feel like it's so powerful and important. And I've been thinking so much about it, as I go through law school, and now kind of midway point, if anyone was doing quarters, like, second year, middle quarter, like I feel like I'm reflecting a lot about what kind of lawyer I want to be and, what kind of person I want to be. And so I'm just really grateful to have all of you all and your examples. So just wanted to end the night with like just sincere gratitude for you guys and like your time and your energy and just, willingness to come back here. It could be a tort to invite you back to the site of this place, but I just think we're really grateful and just really excited to like connect with you all for sure. Or at least I am very.
You speak for us all.
Pedro, anything else?
Just look out for our follow-up email once we are able to get this video recording done. And please continue to share the outreach that we do so that we get more alums engaged. John's story, even Jamie's. Jamie had mentioned that he hadn't been to campus in many, many years until this last reunion. And funny enough, I got to meet him in person finally, even though we both live in Colorado. I got to meet him on campus. That's what I'm hoping this offers, is an opportunity to heal, mend the experiences that many alums have had to go through, because the current students really do value the connection. And us, our team is, we just want to create these opportunities for you all. So the more people that we get involved in the community, the more we could do in support, and more hopefully resources we could provide to the current students and recent grads that are navigating their careers early on. So
And
just thank you all.
I'm hoping that this recording will be expanded. I think there are many alums who have busy careers who, at my suggestion, registered so they can look at the link. So I imagine there's probably 20, 30 people who are going to be watching this in the next, as soon as it comes out. So I'm really quite hopeful to do that. If any of you are interested in being interviewed, contact me. If you don't know, because I did all the deep searching, The Stanford Alumni Directory, which is online, is one way that you can find people by email. More recent grads better than older grads. But anyway, is that it?
Well, thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so
Have a
much.
good night.
Thank you. Have a
Thank
good
you.
Ciao.